Fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you for the warm welcome. And thank you to you all for watching, wherever you're watching, whether in person or remotely. It's fantastic to have you here. So welcome to my talk. As Brian kindly alluded to, I might take the full 50 minutes, but I'm going to try not to. So writing code is easy. Being a great developer is hard. So I'm going to give away my age by saying I graduated over 20 years ago with a stereotypical computer science degree. It was in Java. Java was a baby back then. And I went into the most obvious job I could think of, a Java programmer. And I failed. I failed really, really badly. I quit. I even left the country convinced that I couldn't do it. And I came back and I carved out a career in technical writing. And then more recently, I've actually come full circle and returned to Java and development in my role as a developer advocate. And something's very interesting is happening because I'm noticing that everything this time around is much easier. And I'm like, well, what happened? Why are things a lot easier now? Yes, I probably drink less. I guess that's a contributing factor, but it's so much more than that. And my hypothesis is that learning to write code is the easy part. It's not easy, it's the easier part. It's all the other stuff that we have to learn on the job that's the hard part. So to set the scene, where do we learn to write code? And predominantly, I am making a few assumptions here, but we might learn through academia, quite a theoretical approach over 3 to 4 years. We might do something like a boot camp, bit of theory, bit of practical approach, shorter time span, so 1 to 3 months. We might be self-taught. If you are watching and you're self-taught, huge kudos. I think you're amazing. Apprenticeships as well, certainly in the UK, are quite up and coming. So that's another route that we take into learning to code and becoming developers. They all have advantages, they all have disadvantages. That's another talk. But what do we learn? So these are the topics that, broadly speaking, are on the intake for my university that I went to. And this is the 2021 intake of students. And to my memory, it really hasn't changed that much, which is absolutely fine. But what I want to draw your attention to is programming is very much up there. It features data structures and algorithms. How much fun are they? Mathematics, machine learning, all good stuff. I thought, well, that was my university. What about your university? So I kind of broadened my search criteria. And there were some other cool things featuring, like computer music, sounds fun. Data science and robotics sounds even more fun. Linear algebra, not so much. But fundamentally, we've got this kind of central notion of learning to write code. Bootcamp, similar story, but we start to see some differences coming in here. So we see things like working with REST services, managing Git and GitHub, modeling and building relational databases. We start to see that more practical approach, some of the things that we have to do in our day-to-day coming in. Self-taught. This one was by far the hardest one for me to do, because if you're self-taught, who knows what path you took other than path to awesome. But I'm going to take a leap and assume that programming was still fairly central to your learning journey. But I'm also going to expect to see things like using an IDE, thinking like a developer, and quite possibly work-life balance coming in there, which is quite difficult, different to the academic approach that I discussed a few minutes ago. So that's what we learned. We learned to write code, right? That's what it was all about. That's this thing in the center that everything else goes to. We learned to write code. And then we go into a real job, I know, and it's really worth remembering from this point on that we're all self-taught. The line is drawn, we're all self-taught once you go into that first job. But this talk is called Being a Great Developer is Hard. So let's talk about the hard. So I want to take you through a whole bunch of self-taught skills. They are the ones that I've learned over the last 20 years. They are the ones that I didn't necessarily realize were self-taught skills until very, very recently. And I really want to take you on that journey and show you what skills you have and just how amazing you are. And they're going to be relevant to you, irrespective of your experience. So I'm going to start with the skills that you'll probably encounter fairly early on in your career and progress through to some of the ones that you may not have even encountered yet, or you've just been kind of on the outskirts of. So if you recognize them, please take a moment to see them as the independent self-taught skills that they are. And you can help others who are fresh into the career as well. They might not know what a ride they're about to go on. You can help them. If you're relatively junior in your career or you're still in the learning phase, then you can just see this as a whirlwind tour of all the skills that you're going to acquire on your path to greatness. Now, the rest of the presentation, I'm going to take you through the skill, and then I'm going to give you some resources. You don't need to write the resources down. I have given my wonderful, kind host, Brian, a link. He's going to put that in Rocket for you at the end of the presentation, and it's got all these resources and more. So please don't sit there scribbling with your pen. You don't need to. Right, let's get on with the skills because I have 45 minutes left. First one, Googling. This one is fascinating to me because we all kind of joke about people, you know, who aren't good with Google, and you kind of get your relative to Google the opening times of a store and rip the phone out of their hand. But this is fascinating because when we're learning, certainly in academia, we're very much taught that all our solutions must be elegant and unique. And if there's a wheel, we must reinvent that wheel. And then we go into our first real job, and all of a sudden we are not just expected to, but encouraged to Google. And you have to be good at Googling. And I know that sounds really obvious, but it is a skill. It's most definitely a skill. It's about how well you can think like somebody else. Because if you're Googling something and you're getting no results, you're not Googling the right thing. So it's about how well you can relate to other people describing the problem and the technology. So first resource, skill, resource. It's a blog from Joshua Hardwick, and they actually maintain this blog, which I find really, really helpful. And you might think a skill such as being able to find a page containing 2 words within a certain distance of each other isn't that helpful. But when you are down a development rabbit hole and you have 10 tabs and more of Stack Overflow open, it's really useful to be able to manipulate Google to your will to actually help you to find the answer for what you're looking for. Okay, next skill, reading code. We're taught to write code. Furthermore, we are taught to write code, and we're writing it from scratch, and it's not reality. You go into your first job and you have a roll of sticky tape and some prayers. And in order to apply that sticky tape, you have to be able to read the code around it. And that is most definitely a skill that most of us have to learn on our journey. There's lots of things that can help you with this. Your IDE can reshape your code. You can look for design patterns, indentation, recognizing that code does not tell a story. There's no start, middle, or end. I suppose technically there is a start, but it's so much more complicated than that. There are a couple of resources for this one. First one from Trisha G, and they make the observation that it's funny that computer languages are the only language where one learns to write before learning to read. And when I read that, I thought, oh, wow, that's blindingly obvious, yet I don't really know why it's the way around that it is. Because certainly when I'm practicing my second language on Duolingo, I am way better at reading than I am writing it. So there's some very interesting stuff there that Trisha G's done. The second is a blog from A&M Basdar Raham, and they talk about how you can improve your code reading skills, some helpful strategies for diving in. So they talk about things like running the code. It's that simple. Just running the code can really help you. Really using and knowing the tools, whatever tools you have, whatever tools you like to use, really use them, know them, understand them. Perform temporary refactors, reshape your code. That can go a really long way to understanding it as well. Okay, next skill, technical interviews. Even if it's not your first job, at some point you'll probably be asked to do a technical interview. And you might be asked to implement something that's a little bit unusual or not within your day-to-day programming knowledge. It's whether or not technical interviews are useful is, again, probably another presentation. But there is lots of help at hand to help you ace your technical interview. And this is the one where this is one of the skills where there's more resources that I can share with you later. First one is from Emma Bostian. So they've created a book, so decoding the technical interview process, and it's got a video as well. So If technical interviews scare you, or you're just not a wild fan of them, or you want to get better at them, then that's definitely something that you can check out. If you're kind of sat there watching and you perhaps work for a company where technical interviews aren't working, and by aren't working I mean you're not getting the candidates that you want, and the candidates aren't getting the jobs that they want, and there's this constant mismatch. This is a really interesting read from Sarah Kasabian, because they take you through how they actually changed the technical interview process because they realized it wasn't working, and it can better reflect the job that you're interviewing for. There's some really cool metrics in there, and if you've got the power to change a technical interview process that isn't working, that's a great blog to check out. Okay, yes, I know there are more IDEs than that. There wasn't an appropriate meme. But at some point in your career, you're going to have to start making decisions. And that might be choosing the tools, how you reshape the code base, what your library or framework is. And net new code is pretty rare, as it turns out. Modifying existing code is far more common, and we rely extensively on third-party libraries and frameworks, and they need management. So it's not quite as simple as it first appears. This one is a Java-specific link, so from Kyla Matthews, how do you choose the right library? But I think some of the questions that they ask are really relevant to irrespective of language. So do you even like the API? What are your needs? Do you just want to play with the latest shiny thing, or do you have a specific niche requirement? How popular is it? What's the testing status? These are all really good questions that you can ask yourself when you're faced with that decision and you're getting business pressure of pick something. Okay. Yeah, being a team player. So your team are much like your family. You do not get to choose them as a role, and you are no longer the lone wolf that you were at university or boot camp or self-taught. And it's really hard. It's really hard. I discovered this firsthand when I was, I learned it working as a technical writer, because the last person a developer wants to see 2 days before the release is the technical writer. And I had to really make sure that I built the right relationships and I understood how my colleagues like to work. Did they like me to just sidle up to their desk and ask the question, or did they like a more formal meeting? It takes a lot of effort. You have to factor your teammates in and you have to work alongside them as a unit. There is, of course, the saying, go somewhere quickly, go it alone. To go far, then go as a team, one unit. It's about communication at the end of the day, and it's a skill that we have to learn. A couple of resources for this one. First one from OfferVogmen, and they talk about how technical skills are only part of the story and how teamwork really matters. They also come up with a four-point list for how you can be the team player in the tech world. So you can leave your ego at the threshold. I think we've all had days where we've perhaps not managed to do that. I know I have. Embracing feedback, caveat, providing it's not toxic. Being accountable. Don't be a knowledge hoarder. Number 4 makes me smile because I've been that person, and all that happens is people come and pester you more because the knowledge isn't anywhere else. So if you can help it, try and get the knowledge out there and out of your head. Second resource here from Allison Dingo is 10 ways to become a better developer. And there's some really interesting ideas in here. So creating an environment of psychological safety. But what does that really mean? Right? That means something different for a lot of people. Encouraging equal participation. Amplifying unheard voices in meetings. Repeat back what that person is saying. One of the points actually in this blog that she lists is maintain a growth mindset. If you're not familiar with what a growth mindset is, I encourage you to check out the work by, I think it's Carol Dweck. It's not actually in the links, but I think it's Carol Dweck. I will add it to the links. And they talk about what a growth mindset is, and fundamentally the difference between I can't code and I can't code yet. And when you stop worrying about what other people think and you start going, all right, well, I haven't quite got it yet, and you divert your effort into you and the yet part, amazing things happen in your brain. Okay, next skill, solving problems. And I think we've probably all been there. I'm normally in the second camp of it works, not really sure why, bit weirded out by the fact that it works. But it is about how to be a problem solver. And that is, again, that is another skill that we have to learn. There's, of course, the Steve Jobs quote, everyone in the country should learn to program a computer because it teaches you to think. But it's about mirroring your thought process as well. Now, I came across this blog from Richard Rees, and they had a fascinating way of describing to us how we solve problems. So here's what us mere human beings do. We have a problem, we try a solution. If that doesn't work, we try another solution. If that doesn't work, we try another solution. Now, if you're familiar with security, you're brute forcing. That's what you're trying to do here. You're just brute forcing and trying to solve a problem. And it doesn't work very well, and it is a huge waste of time. So they proposed a 4-point framework, which I really have enjoyed trying it out, because it makes you kind of step back from the problem and go, think about this, you might solve it faster. So number 1, understand what exactly is being asked. Number 2, plan it. Don't just dive straight in, plan it. I'm rubbish at that bit. Divide it, divide and conquer. So split it up, understand it, split it up. Now, if you haven't solved it and you're stuck, and when I first read this, I was like, well, that's a rubbish framework, I'm stuck. But that's when you debug it, you reassess it, you do more research. Is one of your assumptions wrong? So that's when you can start to further subdivide the problem so you can get to the solution. Okay, next skill. This is the only annoying GIF in the whole presentation, but it amused me. In fact, I'm going to pause it. So, self-own. I didn't write a single test at university. That's just, what it is. I hope that's changed. I don't actually know. But regardless of that, writing tests, whether you're using TDD or whatever, it's a skill to be able to write a good test. And of course, there's plenty of testing frameworks out there for whatever language you're using, but you want to have the confidence in your code that you're writing, that you understand. You want to have that belief that it's doing the right thing. And testing goes a really, really long way to achieving this. Great blog here from Dave Cheney, and they make the observation, even if you don't, someone will test your software. And it's kind of slightly passive aggressive, but makes you go, all right, yeah, someone's going to test my software. The blog goes on to talk about who should perform that testing and what proportion of it should be manual testing. And what do those tests mean for your main branch? So how can those tests give you confidence to change your code? Oh, this is a massive cell phone slide. So working with VCS, I've put Git in brackets there because it's the one that I expect most of us are familiar with. So my version of working with VCS was zipping up my code base and putting it on the desktop. Again, I hope that doesn't happen anymore, but maybe it does. But what we find is, as we go through our careers, we become proficient in VCS very quickly. Yeah, clone, commit, basic merge, push, update. The day-to-day stuff we're very, very good at. And then there comes a day and you screw up and something goes in the wrong branch, and then you check it in, and then you rebase and that goes wrong, and before you know it, you are lost, and you phone the resident Git expert on the team. Now, where I used to work, that was a lovely gentleman who, in the end, he did a lunch and learn on all the innovative ways that Helen had screwed up Git. And it was very well attended, which taught me that I might be the one screwing it up and going, oh, screwed it up again. But lots of people wanted to learn from his knowledge and his experience. So I would really encourage you to go beyond the day-to-day, because if you're in the audience, you're like, Git is easy. Great, I'm glad you find it easy. I don't find it easy. So if you're kind of with me and you don't find it particularly easy at times, especially when something's gone wrong, then there are some really helpful resources here. First one is a book from Katie Seiler-Miller. I love this book because it goes from the problem point. It goes from, I accidentally committed to the wrong branch, or I need to undo a commit from like 5 commits ago, which is pretty much always the problem or always the situation that I find myself in. Like something's gone wrong, don't really know what I'm doing, panic. So that is an excellent book, and you can get it and just have it as a PDF for when something goes wrong. The next link is from Peter Cottle. This one is about learning Git, and I really like it because it is a brilliant visual representation of the structure of Git and what's actually going on under the scenes. So whether you like using the command line, or you like using your IDE, or you like using a Git client, whatever it is, this can help you to kind of visualize what's going on with Git itself. So get familiar with it. Right, reviewing code. So this one it's related to reading code, because you're going to have to review what other people have written, and no one teaches you how to do that. Code reviews can, of course, be toxic as well. Again, probably another presentation, but they can be toxic, especially if they're looking like that meme there. And we can all say your method name doesn't follow convention, or why have you used that loop construct when you could use this one? But experience can tell you what to focus on and what to give feedback on. Resources for this one, a couple for you. First one from Andrew Jones, and they have created the 10 commandments for code reviews, which I really like, because it comes from a very human perspective, and we're all humans and we all have feelings. And she talks about how not to take it personally, how to detach yourself from the code, how to contribute your rationale to the code review, how to compromise. It's not always easy. Of course, treating others how you'd like to be treated. There's a whole list there, and Angie does a fantastic job of going into each one and explaining what they mean. So if you are suffering from code review pain, I would definitely check that out. The second resource from Dr. Michaela Grilla, and they make the observation that I think most of us have found ourselves in at some point in time, which is some team fear that we experience the main drawback of code reviews, reduced code velocity, our productivity is reduced because code reviews slow the team down. And then if the code review feedback is useless, it just becomes a nightmare for everybody. So they talk about what we can look for in code reviews and which feedback is actually the most valuable for us. Okay. This whole presentation is just cell phones. Debugging code. So I started out, and occasionally still do, debug with sysout statements. It's not very efficient and it's not very fast. And my excuse is that IDEs weren't around when I learned to write code. 20 years later, of course, they are around and they all have debuggers and they're awesome. My point here is twofold. Firstly, learn to use the debugger in your IDE and learn to use it before you need it in anger if you can, because when you need it in anger, you're probably not going to be in the frame of mind to learn it. My second point is debugging is hard and it takes an open mind to progress. So on the second point, I want to draw your attention to this resource. If you're not already following Julia Evans on Twitter, please go do it. I'm a huge fan of her work. And she put a very timely tweet on a few months back now. But she said, if you run into a bug where it felt impossible to understand what was happening, why was that? And there's a whole thread which I'll let you read. But she came up with five reasons based on community involvement. It's hard to repo. Your mental model might be missing something. You don't have the tools to inspect the program state. One of your assumptions might be wrong. Or the bug is just really complicated. And it could, of course, be any combination of those things. So go check Julia's work out. Next one, estimating stories. This one is a huge leap, certainly from university, and I expect boot camp as well, because at university you said the assignment is due in 2 weeks, and you're like, okay, I can spend a week partying. Well, you're young then, so half a day recovering, 2 days going to see my friends, and then I'll do the assignment. And then you go into your first job, and someone says, how long will it take you to do that piece of work, Helen? And you have no idea. You're like, how am I supposed to know that? And it's really, really hard, because there's often business pressure to over deliver, and that always comes at a cost, and it will be a personal cost to you. There are some things you can do here. You can look at history where some exists. You can use your judgment. You can learn from your erroneous estimations, and of course try and know when it's being used as a stick. Now, if you're not sure why estimating is so hard, imagine this scenario. So you're going to be sent to the shops for supplies. You're going camping. There's going to be 6 to 10 people. The trip will last 3 to 5 days. Everybody eats different things. Buy some drinks, not too many. They're quite heavy. Don't forget the tea. Get the best possible quality. Now, before you step foot in the store, tell me how much that's going to cost. It's really, really difficult. So what Boston talks us through is how we can break down the work, asking questions, don't make assumptions, propose adjusting the requirement, take your degree of confidence into account, setting a maximum number of hours per week. And the one that is by far my favorite, don't forget about the things we tend to forget about. You are a human being. Context switching takes time. Life will throw its curveballs. Other things will come up. So don't forget about the things that we tend to forget about. Second resource for this one from Maddie Osman, why software developers suck at estimating time. So they talk about Parkinsons Law. So give it a week, it will take a week. Everyone is different. Thankfully, everyone is different. Software development is a process. Right? We don't come into work or come to our desk and sit down and start writing code. There's a whole bunch of other stuff we have to do. It might be designing, it might be testing, it might be thinking. Don't underestimate the thinking. And number 4 is it takes time to get into the zone. And that's a really important one as well, related to don't forget the things that we always forget about. Okay, deleting code. This is a Java-centric GIF, I guess. We're taught to write code, and then we're taught to pop it on a little pedestal and admire it, maybe put a little ribbon on the top. We're never really taught that perhaps code shouldn't live forever, and that code has a life cycle. And we're certainly never taught to delete code. And that's the kind of mind-blowing, really. A couple of resources for you on this one, but the first one is don't just comment it out. So when I first came across this blog from Melissa McEwen, I thought, well, that's quite aggressive. I'll delete your commented code without reading it, and I'm not sorry. And I read that and thought, harsh. But the author does go on to explain what you can do about this comment junk and how you can avoid it becoming comment junk. So you can uncomment it, see what it does. For example, but ultimately this goes back to the version control story. So it's a bit of a controversial one, but if you are working on a code base that has a lot of commented out code, it could be worth tracking as to why that situation is occurring. Related to commented out code, this story is it's not that old, it's only about 4 years old now. This is the story of the launch of a New York Stock Exchange system. They manually updated their servers, 4 of them. 1 failed, left the old version running. To take advantage of the new system that they rolled out, they recycled an old flag. It repurposed, it now meant something completely different, hadn't been used in 8 years. They switched the system on, the zombie apocalypse arrived, the flag woke up, and it resulted in a loss of $10 million per minute for about 45 minutes. So it's quite a lot of money. So deleting code is definitely something that is a skill and we have to learn, and it's not quite as simple as we might think. Okay, next skill, pair and mob programming. So pair programming is a really powerful technique to learn and grow your skill set. I have been doing it a lot recently. Sit next to somebody who uses the same IDE that you do. You'll learn all their shortcuts. It's awesome. Mob programming is a derivative of pair programming. They are incredibly rewarding, potentially mentally exhausting, but I would encourage you to find opportunities to pair program and just turn up, just bring your best shot, bring your A game. Couple of resources on this one. First one from Sam Fair. So they take you through their experience of mob programming every day for 5 months, and that mobs are really the opposite of what you want from a successful programming session. So that's a very interesting read. Second one is kind of the other end of the spectrum. It's a blog from Nat Bennett. They make the observation that they paired all days, most days, for years from 2014 to 2020. And it was one of the best things I've ever done for myself, socially and emotionally. And it produced some great software. It also burned me out. And I can absolutely sympathize with that point of view. We have to go to meetings. What's that about? But when you are attending all these meetings, it can be really, really frustrating for us developers, because we're like, well, we're not writing any code, we're not getting anything done, and it kind of spirals in our head. And meetings also come with a really heavy context switching cost. So again, at university, it's very asynchronous. You do module A, you do module B, you do module C, and then you go into your job, and it's like drinking from the fire hose. We really have to learn how to use our time wisely, how to group meetings, how to get good at time management. So this is a great blog from Dan Nines. So Dan says it's the law. Software engineers have to hate meetings. If you're caught enjoying yourself in a meeting, you can get your dev card pulled. So what Dan Nines did was actually dug into why we hate meetings. And it turns out it's not that we hate meetings, it's that we hate inefficiency, poorly planned meetings, poorly executed meetings, missing deadlines, not getting enough time. And they came up with some techniques that you can use to kind of fight the battle. And the first one, which I would encourage you all to do, is take a meeting inventory and establish your baseline for the month. So add them all up, all of the meetings, then add in the ad hoc meetings. Like, how many hours a week is that? Assess the value of each meeting. Is the positioning of the meetings correct based on their value? Group meetings, if that works for you. That does come with a warning on the next skill, though, because there is a cost of context switching. And can you improve the project transparency to have less meetings? It goes back to knowledge hoarding. Can you just get the knowledge out there so you have less meetings? Switching contexts. I cannot emphasize this one enough. Life happens. Life is going to hopefully continue to happen. There will be planned curveballs and there will be unplanned curveballs, and there will be the phone call that you don't want to answer, and you will drop balls and other people will pick them up. Sometimes you'll pick them up. But my point here is it's going to keep happening. It doesn't stop. This train doesn't stop. And there's always a cost that you have to factor in when you're estimating, or just factor into your work in general, let alone estimating. Resource here is from Mayumi Nishimoto. Now, they talk about something called attention residue. And I was like, what the heck is that? So I used to group my meetings when I was in a role where I had a lot more meetings than I do now. But I would say 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. And it would get to 2 o'clock and I would be thinking, why am I still thinking about the meeting that was at 9 o'clock? And it turns out it's this thing called attention residue, which is where our brains cannot switch off from one task and straight into another. We can't do it. It is at complete odds with the way that we naturally work. Our brains are not designed to work on two mentally challenging tasks at once. At least mine isn't. And this can have a really serious knock-on effect for our engagement and our satisfaction. It leaves us exhausted with the quality work. We are just done by that point. It causes us to be spread thinly as well. So what this blog talks about is how you can schedule time for regular deep work, how you can understand your context switching, time management. There is a tip in here called use anti-distraction apps, which sounds very meta to me, but it could work for you. Practice digital minimalism. That one I find incredibly hard, but when I do it, it definitely works. I can't do presentations without Grumpy Cat. You have to learn to say no, and I'm not very good at this. You don't want to annoy the boss. You don't want to let the team down. You want to progress your career, of course you do. But sometimes you have to say no. Actually, a lot of the time you have to say no. There are so many times in this world where I wish I'd said no. Burnout is real. You have to set boundaries, and it goes back to what I was talking about a few minutes ago in terms of setting priorities as well. In fact, as it turns out, you can say no to writing code, which kind of blew my mind when I first read it, because code, that's what we do, right? But every line of code has to be read and understood. It has to be tested and debugged. It's going to increase defects. It's going to introduce new bugs. You sure you have to write that line of code? It's a very interesting read. Next blog from Danila Petrova on developer workload. Now, this one I very much identified with because I don't like saying no. And we all feel that pressure in our day-to-day life. So it's when you need to start saying no. And it feels great, but there's always a cost. So they talk about when you should start saying no, the practical approach, examining your caseload before you give a reply, and then most importantly, how you can say no respectfully and honestly and offer up an alternative. Okay, this one. I can't emphasize how important this one is right now. It is an incredibly fast-moving industry, and like any job, it can take a detrimental toll on your mental health. And in case you've forgotten, we're still in the middle of a global pandemic. Please don't underestimate the immense drain that is on all of us constantly. It's constantly there. So this is about the importance of mindfulness, of rest, and of having those around you. I think your support network is so important. And bearing in mind, many of us haven't been able to see our support network for a long time, and our support networks themselves have had challenges. So take time out, recognize when you're on that path to burnout. Ask your friends. If your friends think you are, you are. Your friends will see it probably before you will. Many of us have learned this the hard way. We've burnt out. It's not a great place to be. I also want to mention here, you don't need a side project or a hustle to be a great developer. You don't need to code on your weekends. If that's what gets you out of bed in the morning and you want to do it, crack on, have fun. But you don't need to do it. So a couple of blogs here for you. First one from Nena Kozar and OfferVogmen, and they talk about 4 things that you can do. Again, that theme of focused and unfocused modes is coming in. Don't forget to work out, and you don't need to be throwing 100 kilos around to work out. You can just go for a walk. Teamwork is everything, and get some hormones, get oxytocin. Great in childbirth, also really does make you feel good. So that will come from your working out and improve mental well-being. They also talk about your cognitive sphere versus your emotional sphere, which is a different way of kind of carving up, but they have a really cute analogy between like your input-output system is your reaction and your memory is multitasking. So it's kind of a nice analogy that I think most developers will identify with. The second one, a couple of blogs from Brian Robinson that I'm really going to drive this point home with. There are some frightening statistics in these blogs. 48% experienced burnout, 61% elevated stress, and 32% felt lonely. So that's kind of horrifying when you see it on paper. So I just want to really get that point home that you need time for yourself. If you are watching and you're in a situation where you might be being asked by your employee to return to the office, or they're kind of going forward with a hybrid model, but you're not really sure how it's going to work, or you're not sure if it's actually the right thing to do. The second blog is a really interesting read, 10 red flags that psychological safety is lacking in your workplace. So that they talk about there are no senior leaders who work remotely, digital communication tools have not been prioritized, celebration, praise and reward only happens in the office. So I hope you're not in that situation, but if you are, have a read of that blog. Right, final one, have a great work-life balance. Right? This is so important. Your family, your friends, your hobbies, especially now where, for so many of us, our offices, our homes and our offices have just become this smushy thing that it's really hard to kind of untangle them, because you walk past and like, there's my computer, gonna keep walking. It's really, really difficult to do. So there's still plenty of us who are fighting the dining room table on a regular basis, and that could well continue. So it's just really important to try and get that separation in where you can. A couple of resources on this one. First one is a blog from Anu Padye, and they talk about, again, seemingly obvious things till you kind of call them out. And it's about prioritizing your time, following a strict routine. I kind of fall in and out of love with that one, because sometimes I think a bit of impulsivity isn't a bad thing. Cut out the things which aren't important. They don't need your time. Be aware of burnout. Don't be a perfectionist. It is the enemy of getting anything done. Trust me, I've been there. Learning to say no, and of course, enjoying yourself. That's super important as well. Okay, final resource. Let me stop that video. This is a blog from Karina, put their Twitter handle there. The blog's really interesting because they talk about prioritizing how we can't know it all. We can't. How we can improve our efficiency and how we can create more time. The video that I've put on the slide is embedded in the blog, and please go watch it because it's beautiful, and it's an I'm not crying, you're crying moment. It's just one thing that the gentleman you see there in the video did, and the impact that it had on his kid, and it just makes you take a step back. It made me take a step back and go, wow, maybe my priorities aren't quite where they should be. So to summarize, I can see Brian's going to be really happy now because I do have time for questions. So to summarize, writing code is what we're taught and is what we learn, but it's being a great developer is writing code and all the other stuff that we have to learn on the job, and they're all independent, self-taught skills. So what do you do now? Well, know your worth and help others to level up. If you recognize these skills, give yourself a pat on the back, because just think how far you've come. You might just think, oh, I just learned that on the job. But this is hard stuff, and you've done that. And equally, you can don't pull the ladder up behind you. Help somebody else, put the ladder down, help them climb up, help them skill up. This is the part where you show them the way. So that is a QR code that takes to that link. Brian is also going to kindly put that link in Rocket for me, I hope. If not, I'll do it. You can hit me up on Twitter there, Helen Scott. And that's it. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you, Helen. I hope I still sound clear, and I'm having an internet issue here, so that's great. I'm now yes. Well, what can go wrong with virtual conference?
It's only your presentation next, Brian. It'll be fine.
No worries. If you can see me clear and sharp, I'm okay, because then my phone can handle it. Anyway, thank you, Helen. I did put the link up in the Rocket chat, so you can find it over there. And we do have a question. From Jamie. Should we drop the technical interview completely, as they often don't represent the day-to-day work, and maybe reduce the probation period to a couple of weeks?
So in terms of the technical interview, if the technical interview isn't serving the company and isn't serving the candidates, then I would vote change it. Now, whether that change has been it would depend totally on the company. But if it's not serving the business and it's not serving the candidates, then absolutely change it. What's the point in putting yourself and all the resources that it needs a company to put a candidate through a technical interview through that, and then for the candidate as well? If it's not representative of what that candidate is going to be doing on their day-to-day job, then I vote change in a big way. Or get rid. In terms of the probation period, this varies hugely in our industry, actually, from what I've seen. Some companies have a 1-month probation period, some companies 3, 6, I've even seen a year probation period, at which point I'm kind of confused. But it's got to be something that's agreeable for the company and for the candidate. So if you're going into a job with a 6-month probation period, are you okay with that? You could negotiate that as well. You can say, actually, I want the probation period to be 3 months, because maybe that's just something that you're not comfortable with doing. So I think you can. I think it's very company specific, but if it's not working, definitely change it.
What do you suggest instead of the technical interview that we normally have? How would you do it if you were in charge?
If I was in charge, I would do an interview that was representative of what was going to be the day-to-day tasks for that individual. So I would like to say that would involve meeting the team as well, but you've got to be respectful of that individual's time commitments. You say, oh, could you come on site for a whole day and spend it with our team? That's a huge, huge commitment for that candidate to do. So I would try and find a sweet spot, and I dare say I would not get it right straight away, but I would try and find a sweet spot of making the interview, let's take the T word out, making the interview representative of the candidate's day-to-day. So real code base, real stuff, maybe pairing, that could work, but definitely not something that is completely implement this algorithm that you'll never have to do in real life. That's a whole other talk, though.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Anyway, I did put a link in the chat room. If you have more questions, feel free to either do this. Oh, we have another question. How do you make time for personal development, especially that the technology is changing super fast? Great question by Anna.
With great difficulty. It would be very easy to stand here and say something like watch less Netflix or see less friends or whatever it is. But I mean, ultimately, time is all we have, right? In this life, time is all we have. And your first priority, in my opinion, should be yourself and your mental health. If that is in a good place and you have bandwidth, then I personally find that carving a little bit of time out each day works for me. If it's, was the question about skilling up? Yes. If it is about stuff that is relevant to your current job, you should be doing it on company time. That time should be carved out for you to learn, because that's part of your job. We don't come packaged with all these skills. Whatever route we've taken through learning, we come packaged with what we've learned. We have to learn everything else on the job. So as far as I'm concerned, that's on the job learning, and I would be looking to my employer to carve that time out. If it's something that you absolutely want to do on your own time for whatever reason, then again, it unfortunately does come down to what I said earlier of a little bit less Netflix or a little bit of this or a little bit of that. That depends on a kind of person by person basis, because that sitting in front of the TV with your knitting is also a form of self-care, so don't cut it down too much.
And I think visiting conferences like this and seeing a lot of topics that are maybe outside of your comfort zone, if you want to learn something new, just try and see what's going on. That gives me at least a boost if I want to invest time in it. So for me, these kind of things are interesting to see if it's worth my time.
That's an excellent point, actually, because one of the barriers that arguably the pandemic has lowered, and I know Mark's going to hate me for saying this, but it is conferences, because we're so fortunate this year that DevOps is running in this hybrid mode. And I know it's been double the work for all the organizers, but it's also in some ways lowered the barrier for attendance, because we perhaps don't have to travel. Of course, we still need the time off work, but maybe we don't have to travel. We can watch stuff, we can dip in and out, and maybe for some of us that's actually works a little bit better. So
absolutely,
really good point.